Hi, leaders. It's Rick Miller, your Tiny Habits and Balance Over Speed coach, with another session of the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John Maxwell. Today's session, we're going to talk about the law of navigation. And it's one of the laws that really comes along as you're growing in your leadership. Because as we know, leadership is influence, and if you're successful, you will have followers. Here's the key. Once you've got followers, they're going to follow you based on the course that you set, your vision. So today we're going to talk about how can you get better at learning how to set that vision so that the results don't just impact you, but your navigation leads your whole team to the destination. We've got a great study that is both illustrative and tragic on the law of navigation with two great explorers that we'll cover. We're also going to talk about how you can get better and really hone up your navigation skills. And then we'll talk about who you can lean on to help you in that process. And then think about a project you can do to really bring home this session through some actual hands on navigating. Let's get started. In 1911, two groups of explorers set out on an incredible mission. They were out to be the first person to reach the South Pole, the lowest center point of our Earth. One of the groups was led by a Norwegian, Raoul Amundsen. He had basically, being from Norway, had wanted to be the first to reach the North Pole, but he realized when he put that together that Robert Peary had beaten him. So he set his sights on the South Pole. Not only did he set his sights on it, he decided to use the law of navigation by meticulously planning it. He didn't just say, I want to go there. He studied who was already there in that region and how did they move around. So he adopted things like looked at how Eskimos that lived in Antarctica moved around and concluded that probably the best way to get there was to use dogs and skis. So what did he do? He selected members of his expedition team that were expert skiers, and then he got dog sleds and made sure that the dog sleds were set up in a way that they'd work for a few hours rather than having the traditional expedition of people carrying their packs. He didn't stop there. He studied the route and he set up supply chain operations along the way so that he didn't have to carry everything the entire route. He had supplies so that there wouldn't be too much of a load on the sleds and the dogs. Not only that, he even went further and made sure he had the best equipment. Why? Because he knew this was going to be a tough trek. Now let's contrast that with Robert Scott, Falcon Scott, who was a naval officer who had the same ambition. The difference was he just took fellow expeditioners that didn't necessarily know anything about the conditions. He didn't spend a lot of time on worrying about their equipment, and he decided, I'm going to use the latest technology. I'm going to use motorized coaches, and I'm going to use ponies, which we've always used, to transport our goods there. Guess what happened? Edmondson actually won the race, and he finished 31, 34 days ahead of Scott. That would be okay. So he planned better and he succeeded. But it gets worse. Scott's people didn't realize it, but when they started, the ponies and their motorized sleds both broke down. The ponies had to be killed halfway there, and the sleds basically were abandoned. So the men ended up having to trek their supplies. Did they have supply chain stops? No. What happened? Not only did they reach there later, they lost all their ponies, and tragically, all but four of them were left to head back to their start, and all four of them, including Scott, died. It's a tragic story, but it just shows what happens with someone who actually does some planning. Because what we have learned through numerous studies is for every minute you spend planning, you can save 10 minutes of operations. In this case, 10 minutes, 10 days can be a fatal difference, as it was for the Scott expedition. What can this expedition teach us about how to develop the skills of a navigator? One of the things that Edmondson did was he looked around and drew on past experiences. How many times when we're plotting a course do we actually make sure that we look around and think, okay, who's been here before? He was not the first one to try to reach the South Pole, so not only did he look at who was living there and draw on the experience of Eskimos, but he also, and this is something we can all do, he looked at the past failures. And oftentimes, what we do when we fail is we try to just bury it and forget about it. But he looked at the failures and he took time to analyze them, which is a great skill because you and I both know we learn more from our failures and we grow through failures, oftentimes greater than we just look at our past successes. Number two, he looked at the conditions. And oftentimes, when we're trying to learn how to navigate our course for our company or our future, we need to basically make sure that we step back rather than just saying that looks like the way to go. As they say, examine twice and plan once. He basically looked at things like not only did what would work, but things like the culture. What looked at the timing of it. So when do you go? Why would I want good skiers versus people who had done other expeditions? So he basically made sure that he examined all the conditions as he was moving forward, and I think that's something we can all do. He also listened to people. He didn't just say, "This is my way. I've been doing this before." He talked to the locals. He talked to his team. He got feedback on the plan before he ever put it in place. How many of us, as leaders, think that because we're the leaders, we develop the plan and just implement it without asking the other team members? What I know is that when you take the time to involve your team members, not only will you get great advice, but you're going to get even better buy in. And lastly, and this comes out of Jim Collins' great book, Good to Great, what he called the Stockdale paradox. And that is confront the brutal facts, but never give up hope on the future. And that's what James Stockdale did when he was in the Hanoi Hilton as a prisoner during the Vietnam War. And that is something that we should all do. The brutal facts were that Antarctica is a killer climate. You can't afford to be wrong on that any more than you can if you're trying to surf big waves in Hawaii. So you've got to confront the brutal facts, but you don't give up hope. You've got to still inspire that in spite of the facts that you're confronting, you still have hope that there is a solution here. Great things to learn if you want to grow in your skills as a navigator leader. I want to share with you something that I've learned personally and I've applied with many of my clients, and that is how to combine the law of navigation with the law of process. And what I have found is that one of the best ways to navigate is to do it daily and weekly, but I start with daily because what I found is it keeps me from getting way off course. If you wait months to do planning, you can go 30 days off course. I found doing it little by little, a process of daily, has really helped me stay on course and has helped me navigate some pivots in my business. What I do daily is what I call my end of day review. And I look at each day and I confront the brutal facts of what did I do well? What could I improve? Most importantly, and this gets into keeping hope, what did I learn today and what am I grateful for? This kind of keeps me in the right frame of mind to get going for the next day. I then move right into my next day planner. And in light of what I've learned today, I then say if I can only get one thing done tomorrow, what's going to be my course? What am I going to focus on? Not my day timer, but the most important priority. Then I spend some time thinking because I may find that if I just slow down and put some time into thinking, which is really a form of planning, then I can adjust my course before I ever start. And that's really helped me. And then I think about, okay, what can I learn to help me? And so I'm always looking for what am I going to read to help me stay on course. Hope that helps. I found it's made a just big difference in my moving through life. Okay, leaders, you know it's my favorite time. Mirror time, where we're going to self-examine your navigating skills. Here's some questions that I want you to answer. But first, I want you to think of a project that you've been involved with, that maybe it's at work, maybe it's at home, maybe it's at one of your social or volunteer groups. And if possible, I'd love for you to pick a project that didn't work out, that you were less than fully successful at, because those are the best ones. What I want you to think about in that project you pick are these four questions. What did you do well? What did you learn? What advice would you seek ahead of time, or did you seek? And what would you do differently next time? Next, I want you to think about it as you move forward with your navigating skills, that the Stockdale paradox talks about, who do you lean to give you faith in the future? That's kind of me in most cases, because I'm an encourager. I'm someone that loves to encourage people. And so a lot of people come to me and I help them dream out and think about why it's possible for their dreams to come true. It's one of the things I love about running an incubator. On the other side, I can think of a time when I've been on the other side, where I have been the voice of realism. My best friend growing up and in college was Dr. Will Fernandy. He's an incredibly successful person who, from day one, had just leadership and ideas. What I ended up being for him was, I was his realistic gauge. Before he would implement an idea, he would run it by me. And unless I could find a fault or reason why it wouldn't work, he was going to put it into gear. But he always was smart enough to use the law of navigation and double check it with me in that role. So I've been both roles, but in general, I would much rather be the person that you look to for faith. Hope that helps. Okay, leaders, you all know that the best way to learn something is to not just listen to it, but put it into action. So, our last assignment will be creating a project for you to apply what you've learned about the law of navigation. You're going to see some steps down here that you can do, but I'd say take a project at work that you want to work with. And if you'll notice the red letters, what you're going to see is some steps that will make sure that you plan ahead. And I think what you're going to see is, if you follow these steps, you're going to do great. Now, one thing we know is that failing to plan is always planning to fail. And the last thing we want as we grow as leaders is to not be good at the law of navigation. So that's it for this session. Never forget that it's always too soon to quit, and it's never too early to keep growing. See you at the next session.